My name is Elmore Semi-Grim, and I have a fairy tale. I must suggest better than my brothers and cousins did previously. At any rate, I have a story for you to start things off. As you can tell, I haven't written it out, or I'd be reading it, I guess. But rather than let that chiseler Kairu get all the credit, because this has to do with what I had in mind talking about in general. And here's the story. You got to imagine first we're in a strange state. And you people on tape, you're going to have to figure out what I mean by state. You could think I'm talking about a place, or you could think about I'm talking about an internal nervous condition. It'd have to be a strange state, and in this state there would have to be a fairly unusual person. Just trust me for a second. He's fairly unusual, and he decided to offer himself up for public office. Let's assume in this strange state they had elections. And so this man does not declare himself to be either a member of the Green Party or the Red Party. He's not either a Whig or a Tory or a Royalist or a Liberal. And he seems fairly intelligent, and a reporter comes to him and says, well, you haven't said much of anything. We would like to know what it is that you plan to do if you're elected. What is it that you are for and against, and etc. Just break it down. And this man says, or it could have been a woman. This person says, you're right, I am neither this nor that. And if you're going to ask me questions like that, I won't even respond. I'm not going to waste my time on such a childish level. So the guy says, all right, but what are you for? The guy says, all right, if I'm elected to this office, what I'm for, what I will promote, is anything that is beneficial to the civilized growth of humanity. So the guy writes, and the reporter says, as they would do in the city, the reporter says, well, wait a minute. You say you're not a Democrat or a Republican, you won't take any label, so we don't know really what you stand for. I would know then. But now you just say that you're in favor of, that you'll promote anything that would be a benefit to the civilized progression of humanity. But you're saying that from one view. That's your opinion. I mean, how are we going to know? We don't know if you're a Republican or a conservative. I might know what that means, but if you're just saying that, let me put it to you this way, sir. You say that now, but how would a person know? How would one individual, that's pretty subjective, how would one person know what is beneficial to the civilized growth of humanity? And the guy says, in response to how could one tell, he says, well, if you can't, then you ain't. Did enough of you follow it? The question was, what things? How would you know what specific things, or people, but things, what stuff, what things would actually contribute to the evolution of humanity? And the guy says, well, if you can't, that is tell, you or anybody, if you can't, then you ain't. You're not one of them. Consider. What would it be if that were indeed what the reporter asked, the beginning and end of it? To say, all right, the idea that we're going to do, or that a person should try and do that which would be beneficial to the evolution, the civilized evolution of humanity, let's call it just for a second, in the widest sense of the word. What would it actually be like if indeed what the reporter was tacitly inferring, that, hey, everybody would have some opinion on that. That's so subjective, it wouldn't mean crap. There's no way that you can say what's actually of benefit to the civilized growth of humanity. That's impossible. Every person on this planet would have their own little half-baked opinion. What if that were true? At least any of you, see, I put it in that sense, at least any of you are thinking already that, yeah, that is true. If that's true, you're in a world of trouble. But what if that were true, that that was the alpha and the omega of it? that everybody may have some opinion if you ask them, are there things that would be beneficial to the civilized expansion of humanity, and everybody on the planet that heard you would go, yeah, you saw it, such as, and everybody would have a different opinion. What if that was it? Not that that couldn't happen, but that that was the statement of reality. That in other words, you can't tell. You do understand out in this state I'm talking about, either or. There are plenty of people who would say, well, that is a fact. You can't tell. There is no objective way to judge, to state that this thing, this idea, this action is actually beneficial to the civilized evolution of humanity. It may be, it may not be. Part of it may be, it might be sometime, etc. But there is absolutely no way to definitively, to clinically, to objectively, as they would be want to say, make such a statement. What if that were true? And parts of you, somewhere in your nervous system, parts of people in that state will go, yeah, it is true. Well, if it is, you do not belong in that particular state. As long as I use that as a literal springboard to start with, that story of politics, what I was mentioning along the way, those of you that you don't have to be a political junkie, if you just keep up enough with the news at all, or you have once or twice in your life, are you aware of the fact, the little part I threw in the story? Well, let's just take our part of the world. There are variations everywhere else and throughout time, but right now, what would be called an independent of someone trying to gain political office outside of perhaps a small village in New Hampshire, but someone trying to gain power statewide, and one of the 50 we have here on a national level, do you realize it would almost be impossible for the person to come into the sensibilities, the perception of the bell curve, the middle class, intellectual perception of our state, that is, America, if they did not have a title of either being a Democrat or Republican, or at least a liberal and conservative. That would be almost impossible. Now people try it. It pops up because life does such as this. This pops up, somebody in different states will run for governor, they'll run for the state senate, or they'll run for a national congressional seat, and they might get a small write-up somewhere, mentioned down in a sidebar in Time or Newsweek about who's actually running. The big contenders for the Republican nomination, the Democratic nomination, and they may say, and then there's a guy, an ex-insurance executive who says he's running as an absolute independent, that he's sick of party labels, and that's it. You better read that and remember, because that's the last time you're going to hear of him or her. Not because of some political reason, not because of some conspiracy between those parties, but because of the dualistic foundation of ordinary 3D intelligence. Even a reporter, the story I made up, it was getting to the punchline where I'm going something else. Consider this a side trip for a minute. But it would be true, it's just part of the whole scenario that, let's say we got a reporter that has no particular favorites and he's trying to cover, they send him out, cover all the people who have now qualified to run for this seat. And they get around to this guy, and therefore to ask him, oh, is it true you qualified, you, through whatever process they had, you qualified as an independent, is that right? And the guy says, yeah. So were you ever a Democrat? They'll start such as that. Well, do you consider yourself, I know you said you're an independent, but would you consider yourself, let's say, a more conservative independent or a liberal independent? And the guy said, all right, if he fell for this, and he said, all right, I guess I'm more conservative in fiscal matters and probably a little more liberal on social issues. So the guy said, well, in other words, you would be, if you were indeed a Republican, we might call you a maybe a yuppie Republican, or something like that. And the guy would finally, if he's ever going to get his name in the paper, he's finally going to go, well, I wouldn't have said it that way, but okay. This is not a contest between the press and this candidate, or any candidates. It is that the way that the nervous system, up at the cortical level now, is situated, the man is almost invisible. The press couldn't deal with him if they tried to, and you kept up with politics and you read about him. And you might see his picture, you might see him in person, he looks like a fine fella, he's clean, shaven, dressed up with a tie. He's intelligent, and yet he tries to, let us assume, answer each question. He's out of the forum. The Democrats answer a question, and the Republicans, or the liberals and conservatives, and then they ask, Mr. So-and-so, our independent candidate, you say. So then he tries to say, all right, I don't have the same exact position. I do not have a mechanical reaction to fiscal matters in such a conservative way as this fellow over here. I would have to be considering this on a case-by-case basis, and by then, the people's intelligence, those that came there, interested in politics, would have begun to wander off. I'm not here in person getting a lot of reaction from you people. I'm not talking about politics, but this is just a prime example of the way the intellect is set up. There is a way. It is not obvious, and it is not necessarily or necessary to be seen by ordinary people. But there is a basis upon which there is a reality that a few people have got to be able to clearly recognize the complex and the healthy from the simple and the sickly. And it's always available. But there is no three-dimensional, no ordinarily verbalizable distinction, continual definition of what is healthy, what is more complex, and what is simplistic. It would not be, to use a political illusion again, it would not be to say, all right, a more complex matter always, or a more complex attitude would always be to be conservative in fiscal matters. That's not true. Now remember, I'm saying this allegorical, but I'm using that still as a springboard. There is no way to say that. It might be true and it might not be true. But there is, at any given time, a more complex, a more healthy response to, attitude towards, idea about any given subject. And there is a more simple one. And it is always sickly in comparison to the one which would be more conducive to a continuing evolution and expansion of humanity's civilized growth. It's always there. Anything you hear about that is pertinent enough to catch the public's attention, that is, catch the intellectual energy needs of the people in the bell curve. And let's say that you're just paying attention enough or watching TV or reading, and you realize, well, this is going on, they're having this big argument over whatever. School prayer, abortion, sending federal monies to state schools, to private schools, whatever it is. If it is long enough that it becomes part of the so-called news items of the day, of the month, of the year, of this session of Congress, then there is a more healthy, there is a more conducive, a more beneficial way that life will move, whether you see it or not, and whether it seems to happen in some splashy, obvious way to ordinary intelligence or not. But there is one response to it, such as saying, should we be in favor of blank or should we not? If it is big time enough and expansive enough to actually is going to have and is already having some general effect upon the life of life, then there is one view of it, one idea, one energy transfer that is more healthy, more conducive, and there's one that's not. But that does not compute. You cannot report that. It will not make the papers. That is, it will not get up here back in the city, in the ordinary state. If you tried to do it, which would take somebody not knowing what they're doing, because I point out people do try this. It happens. And they normally call themselves an independent. And they can be very intelligent and say, well, now I do not subscribe across the board to the liberal agenda, nor do I take in toto that kind of conservative attitude. I would take each and every bill and item that came to me, and I would, and by then everybody's going, is that not the nature of ordinary intelligence? I'll answer for you. Hell yes. But that is not the kind of intelligence that is sufficient to do anything like this. It is not a matter that there is a non-ending world of the relative. It is not that it's impossible to define what is more conducive. When I say, I've used it 4 or 5 times, I was using, based on my story, the that which would be a benefit to the evolution of civilized humanity, or the civilized evolution of humanity. Take that in the widest possible sense. That if you start hearing something about a great debate still going on about gun control, should ordinary people have guns, whatever it is, if you cannot look at it and something strike you, and now, surely you people on tape, maybe you don't know, I am not talking whatsoever about guns or abortion or politics, nothing, other than the fact that out there is in here. But every one of those things, and you hear that there are raging arguments going on, there is one attitude right then, and right then could be a month, a year, until further notice, but right now there is an attitude that is that if life suddenly adopted this attitude, that only you can see it, that's all you're worried about, that yes, this is what they should be doing, this would be more conducive. If your thing is, well, on one hand, da-da-dum, but on the other hand, da-da-dum, or worse yet, that you think, well, wait a minute, if the Republicans are against it, as the conservatives are against it, it must be bad. If that's the extent of the way you think, you don't think. If that's as far as you can see, you don't see. You have right before you, if you can see in the manner that I talk about here, you have right before you a clear view all the time if the matter amounts to anything. It may be just a shot in the dark, it may be live whistling or spitting or wiping something off of its shoe. But if it is some sort of debate that's been going on, and most of these debates have been going on for thousands of years, they just resurface and they get renamed. But in all of them, there is a clear, better choice. Now, it could change tomorrow. It could change an hour from now. But if you're left with that kind of intellectual transformer, then what you hear about, you go, well, boy, I don't know, that's a sticky one. That ain't a sticky one. You got a sticky brain. You're stuck to something. You're stuck to some old world attitude. You're stuck to some old world intelligence. Because any time that there are two choices, which remember, if it's alive, apparently it's got two choices, it's going to split into two parts. One of them is preferable to the general overall health and evolution of life. Not what you like. It's outside of one lifetime's observation. It is simply a fact that this would be more conducive right now. And it's not necessary that that's the way it's going to be as far as your perception of it is in your lifetime, but it will be. You could look upon a real explorer, my still ad hoc description and name, those kind of pioneers that would do this sort of thing internally. I guess you realize, once I say it, that such people are never truly satisfied wherever they are. I mean, can you imagine a real Davy Crockett or Magellan? Let's try Magellan. Crockett wasn't that big a deal, unless you're in love with funny hats. Can you imagine a Magellan sailing around the world and then coming home and telling his wife, well, I'm home, dear. And she says, well, it's about time. And she says, I don't want you leaving here anymore. And he said, I guess you're right. And he sits around the rest of his life and he whittles and spits. A real revolutionist, a real explorer, no matter where he or she is never satisfied. You can't be satisfied. Now, this is far beyond the mere physical existence of man. It's beyond the moods of the motor language of what you actually move to or where you go. But you cannot be satisfied where you are, or you have quit exploring. Now, you cannot, I guess I could add that in this particular way, if you have your own glimpse of it by now, a real explorer would not be satisfied where they are. They would always want to be on the go, or at least, in the full sense of the word, at least planning to be so. That is, even if physically, even if the three-dimensional reality of your physical organism was not actually on the go, that if Magellan was in fact actually got home seeing his backyard for a while, That kind of real Magellan. He might be sitting there, and he might be twiddling his thumbs and spitting on the ground. His wife on, "Are you still out there?" He went, "Yeah." She said, "Boy, it's a lot better to have you home. You're not out running around." "Yeah." But inside, that mother is plotting. That is a real revolutionist. That is a real explorer. You can't be satisfied where you are. You would no longer be an explorer. See if you can see, I'm sure you can, a connection to something I mentioned several tapings back. Having to do with repetition. Repetition builds strength. The obvious way being to see lifting weights. You decide you want to have the world's biggest, or at least the biggest biceps on your block, or bigger than your wife or girlfriend. You get a dumbbell and you go, no. Repetitions. It will build three-dimensional strength. There is a parallel in the limbic and cortical areas. In these areas, as far as old world dudes and dudettes are concerned, this kind of repetition is a basis for sanity, stability. But need I point out that a real evolutionist doesn't need this kind of sanity. Repetitions are going to build strength, but it's a kind of strength that a revolutionist and an explorer does not need. Because now we're going to have to put strength for a second, except for those of you that are already catching the drift, in quotation marks. That not only can you, through repetition, make your bicep bigger. Not only that, through repetition in non-motor areas, moods, thoughts, words, repetition builds strength there. But it's the kind of strength with ordinary people that is their sanity, that is their stability. It's what makes a Republican a Republican, a liberal. It's what makes Carlotta Carlotta and Winston. It's the repetition of, well, yes. That their moods, what they feel and what they think, is a continuing process such as this. You just don't see it, but in the limbic and the cortical systems, they're going, gun control, by God, they'll never take my guns away from me. Those damn phony baloney liberals, I don't know where they come from, but they can't do that to me. Yeah, I'll have another beer. Give me a beer. What? Boy, I can't stand people like that. No, I don't believe that. That is strength. Now, push far enough, we could take a quick view. Surely you're following, and you can say it gets so far and it seems to be a kind of prejudice. In the true sense of what prejudice is, of prejudging that some group of people, some idea, or something that as soon as you hear about it, you have your immediate opinion. And of course, prejudice is used in a prejudicial manner, I guess. People use prejudice in a negative sense. But everything is prejudice. That's what ordinary feeling, and especially thought, is what we're interested in. That part of the nervous system, everything is prejudiced. It's either that or you ask somebody, what do you think about so-and-so? And they go, wow, I never thought about that, I don't know. And if you watch it, people don't really like to be asked crap like that. He wants somebody to say, oh, I recognize you. Hey, I'm a reporter. I've been doing a little thing, and I remember that I saw you so-and-so, and yeah, can I ask you a question? Well, sure. Well, I noticed you're here in this area. Did you know down the street, a guy just made a speech about so-and-so, and he said such and such and such. What do you think of that? And you go, and you got no idea. You heard the words, and they treat it like with some subject of which you were supposed to be aware, and you have to go, and what you're saying is, I don't have any prejudice. You say, well, I don't know. Oh, sure, I've heard about that, but I'm still mulling that over. I'm having to, we need additional info. But your nervous system reacts hostilely toward that. Just don't ask me stuff that I'm not already prejudiced about. People don't use that term, but that is, don't play me a song I never heard. Which is one I was going to let Kyrute pull on you one time and ask just point blank. This one can make you dizzy. But why would you ever go up to a band and request, do you guys take requests? And they say, yeah. Why would you ever go up and request a song you already know? Get dizzy on your own time, don't do it now. People would not use the term prejudice, but to have an opinion is prejudice. To have a feeling, for somebody to come up and say, you're still putting on weight. You have an automatic feeling towards something, an automatic thought, an automatic response. And of course, when I said that, say, well, I've thought it out before. I've decided that is a rational man's opinion. And I do have that opinion, I'll agree. But it is not prejudice. It's exactly prejudice. It's either that or you've never thought about it before. That is trapped in the old world. That is repetition. That is the basis of stability, intellectually especially, and then in the emotions. And of course it is obviously, I assume you know, stability down at the very crude, simplistic, primary, physical level. Which when you talk about repetition and habit down there, you have a different ball game, because that is the basis of sanity. That is the basis of continuing health for everybody from hippopotami to human minds. Is that kind of, there's no reason to be interfering with repetition there. You might want to expand it, but that is the nature of the motor language, which does not have to be verbal, of course, but that is the nature of what you do, the way you move, the motions you make, even if it's something you picked out, such as getting exercise. It is a matter of habit. You can do something for your own benefit, to learn something, which I point out, but in general, you do not want to be trying to run in a completely different way every morning. Like to run on one leg every 3 steps, or to run backwards and turn flips with your eyes closed. Or in some neighborhoods, it probably wouldn't do that you go out and start skipping every morning instead of running, you know, and waving your hands. But once you get past the motor level, repetition is the friend of all the old-timers. It is not the friend of an explorer. And yet it is the absolute, it is the literal basis of stability and sanity in the nervous system. Absolute prejudice. Absolute, all right, yeah, I've thought about that. Glad you asked me. You can take in the energy of the question, or you can take in if somebody just makes a statement. You go, hey, you're full of it. You can take the energy, whether it comes in apparently in a query or a statement or even an attack, and you have your ability to take it in, transform it, and to pass it along. To pass it back to the person, to pass somebody else. Did you hear that crap? That is prejudice. That is repetition. That is their basis. That is your basis. Up to the ordinary line level of ordinary intelligence and consciousness, that is the basis of civility, stability, sanity. But that's sitting in your backyard the rest of your life. It will not do. Of course, if I tried to describe much more, which we've been through this before, if I tried to describe much more to an ordinary crowd, then all I'd have to describe, or the way they could hear it, if they heard it all, was, all right, now what you're going to describe is, if you're trying to do otherwise, you're going to have to in some way describe what insanity is. How you have got your own internal government destabilized. If you're not going to think what you've already thought, if you're not going to feel what you're already going to feel, what are you going to feel or think? And if I was dumb enough to talk to ordinary people and they asked me that, I'd say, well, you got me. And I'd realize, boy, I went too far. Another little piece, a further note of a revolutionist eschewing non-motor repetitions. The continual attempt, the need to, the planning to explore. It's connected with several other things that I've talked about recently. To actually be struggling against repetition beyond the motor level. To be attempting, or to find yourself in a position that you are never satisfied. Not in some ordinary sense. Now, you know I don't mean that. Not just being dissatisfied because you're not rich and famous and look like Lawrence of Arabia on a good day, but to be dissatisfied on a new level, a secret level, a useless level, for the general scheme of things. To be dissatisfied on that level, to be able to be a real explorer, which would be a kind of separation from the old, would in fact be a cut in the general genetic flow in your individual case. That is what another description, as obscure as it may sound at first, but it is another description of what this kind of activity has always been about. It's not unlike, literally, the individual making a cut in the general genetic chain, an individual one. It's only you. There's no question. It's not even arising about being able to spread or whether you're going to affect somebody else. Just forget that. It would be a kind of individual cut in the general chain as it ran through you. Not some mass movement, but through you. But it's still the general train. It's not, because there is no individual train. It's just what everybody else thinks, that yes, I'm a little individual. There's a nice down-home Protestants used to think, we're all little God's children, and I'm a little trooper, and God has got his eye on the sparrow and me. Forget the general, forget any kind of individual genetic line. Everybody says, well, yes, I'm an individual. There's no one like me. No one has my fingerprints. You ever notice how people love to point that out? You never thought about it before. Everybody accepts it, that it's good for crime fighting and identification of lost children or bodies. But people bring it up all the time. They got nothing to do with crime prevention or finding lost people. Is that the basis of your individuality? Well, I may be generally simple and sickly and kind of stupid, but by God, I got unique fingerprints. You would be dealing at the general flow, just consider the three-dimensional flow of all of humanity. This general genetic chain is the way it spreads out through everyone. You would be, as it were, making an individual cut in yours. I bring this up for a specific reason. I could go into other areas. But this would be what I have attempted to sketch for you and to get you to look at in many, many times and many, many ways. This would be the reality of a break from the past. This would be your individual, real break from the past. The past, not just what happened, not just your memory, but the past. That you had cut that line. You had made a cut in it. It, of course, does not send you out flying into space and that you no longer have any connection with the human race. But that which would have seemed, if you were still ordinary enough to think, let us say in psychological terms, it would be as though, in a sense, this is what psychology in the city believes they're talking about, them and cults and some forms of religion. That is, in some way, if I go through some analysis or drug treatment or whatever, the gods would smile on me favorably. All of these real tacky and even traumatic things that have happened to me personally in my past, in some way they would unfold, they would reveal themselves, I would have a better understanding of it, and therefore I would be sort of freed from it, and I'd be like a new person. And that's what they're talking about. All the way from Zen to Southern Baptists to Catholics to Muslims to all kinds of cults going on now, to psychiatry, psychology. That's what they're talking about. But it does not happen. But what I'm telling you would be this kind of exploration you have, as it were, is not unlike making a cut in the nervous system that's got you up to where you are, but not on the basis that all that's happened to you in the past is in some way been undone, been unraveled, been revealed. There's none to be unraveled, none to be revealed. It's just the blood flowing, the atmospheric pressure going in and out of you, food going in, garbage coming out. That's all that's happened, but it's as though you have made a real break with the past. That what you are now, you still remember what happened. If you got to, or there's some reason to, you still recognize people, you still recognize your family. But you are almost a self-made, you're almost a living, unknown mutant. Other than this, what I was going to point out specifically, there is no such thing as a break with the past. And if there is no true break with the past, all ideas of change are conditional ideas of change. And in my, I think my charitable way, I've struck again that change is conditional. If you have not actually broken with the past, what change has been made? The change has been made is exemplified. The obvious example, or the one I keep using, is like a reformed alcoholic. Even what they say. Have you actually, you used to really drink a lot? Well, hell yeah. I had faced it, I was an alcoholic. So you quit drinking. No, us alcoholics, we don't say we quit drinking. I simply say I haven't had a drink today, or whatever it is they say. In other words, they don't even say they've changed. Or you find somebody, boy, it's been years since I've seen you, and you look different, or, you know, the conversation goes on, the guy says, well, I returned to my church, or I converted to Catholicism, I did something, and I am a new person. I am now a very religious person. Are they? Is it a change? Not if they got to talk about it. Not if they're aware of it. All sorts of material examples of me saying they can talk about it. If they are talking about it, they're not. But they will then say, if you say, well, all right, you mean you used to always be running around your wife? Yeah, you're right. You used to drink a lot. Yeah. Well, do you do that kind of stuff anymore? I mean, is being a Catholic or a Baptist or whatever, is it actually made you, when you say a new person, or is that just some term you use? Well, we do use that in our religion, and I'm not trying to be, if there is such a thing, spiritual or egotistical about this, because I got to tell you, I'm still human. Sometimes I still want to drink. Sometimes I have a drink when, you know, stress gets too bad. And so I don't say that I'm actually, or us Catholics, or us whatever, we don't actually say that we're absolutely new people or that we'll never sin again. We're still human. What they're saying is, I haven't actually done it. It's like, oh no, I hadn't quit drinking. I just hadn't had a drink today. It is not a cut. It is not a break with their past, their individual past, which is the general genetic flow, but as far as they're concerned, their individual past is still breathing down their neck. It is still unconsciously or consciously, it is subtly or not so subtly driving them, nipping at their heels. That is not a break with the past. That is not, in fact, change. Let's see if we can pull it into an even slippery area. In the midst of the ordinary bourgeoisie bell curve back in the ordinary state of humanity, in that good, sane, stable place where the past is still right upon us, and people think good thoughts, and then don't do them and all that. You know, the city. This city, Hackensack, Queens, Fayetteville, Bakersfield, Key Largo. In those places in life, people are wired up to want to fit in. Don't even waste your time, I'll waste it for you by covering it. Outside the bell curve, outside that which is the healthy transformation of energy in last body, there are, of course, those exceptions, those fewer people, the simpler people that are wired up to be the necessary fuck-ups. There are people, a few generations back, everybody had an uncle or somebody that was, you know, old weird Uncle Elmer. Probably wasn't married, and he wrote cranky letters to the editor of the paper, and no matter what everybody in his little town or his community was in favor of, he just automatically was against it. Didn't matter what. Now, if you didn't have an uncle like that, surely you know that there have been people like that in life, but that is by no means That is not what carries the day for life. That is not where life's general GI tract is. That is not the way life is eating and growing and transforming energy. But there are always those people out on the fringes. Now back to that which drives life, that which nourishes life. This is not very exotic yet, what I'm getting to. I just want you to see, just think about it for a second, you should know it. You and everyone else, that is the you of you in your nervous system that's good, middle class, bourgeoisie, hoi polloi, womp bop a loo bop, want to fit in. You want to fit in. That's what fads are about. Whether they're called fads, whether they last a month, whether they last a day, which ain't much of a fad, but even people who laugh, people who make yuppie jokes circa 1989, people who will laugh about the baby boomers. See, if you use that, it shows that you're with it, you won't fit in. That the baby boomers now have got to have cars that have numbers and letters in their name, and a guy will make a joke about it. Not a professional comedian, somebody sitting around even make perhaps a sarcastic joke and walk right out and get in his BMW. And make sure that when he pulls up his bull full of something, he shows whatever the designer name is on his pants or on his coat. They can even make jokes about it. You understand? The guy's sitting there, dressed up as whatever the archetypical yuppie would be right now, in the archetypical car, in this archetypical woman or man, and make jokes. Apparently spread some ridicule on this, and yet you would say, well, there's a living example of it. Things are wired up that people want to fit in. It is one of the purposes of fads. We got to turn the tape over. People want to fit in. And when I said fads, now a lot of you seem to respond to me using yuppie this time in our day and place. But whatever's going on. But I want you to see the fads, the way that they're normally referred to and the way they make history books, is down on the visible, primarily motor level. That is the physical level of how people dress, the kind of car they drive, where they hang out, how they got their hair fixed, what clothes they're wearing. That is what is referred to. If you found the book, I'm sure by now there are books somewhere on fads. Fads in America, fads in Belgium, fads in Albania if they could afford them. But fads are always, well, kids playing with hula hoops, or pet rocks, or everybody having to have Bill Blast jeans, or whatever it is. But they forget, they're not wired up to notice that people want to fit in somewhere else in a way that they would first deny. But here I go. People want to fit in cortically. People want to fit in, they want to think what everybody else is thinking. Not for some individual reason, not for some psychological reason. It's because of the general, middle-of-the-road genetic flow in life's body propels people even at the cortical level. Once you get past the lower levels, that people want to dress alike in the bell curve. They want to look alike. They want their hair to look alike. Beyond that, it's not talked about. There's no particular reason for it to be now. People want to think alike. They're driven to think what everybody else is thinking. A real explorer, withal, desires to have what would amount to a custom-fitted intelligence. He or she would be, in fact, looking for a kind of tailor-made cortical and perhaps even limbic system. Seeing as how it's up to me to defend the good name of ordinary intelligence, let me jump right in and point out that I too am aware that the world is full of, now our part of the world especially, but full of people who say that their one desire, or one of their strong desires, is to be an individualist. They say that, always have, but right now you're surrounded by people, and there are people in you surrounding you, who would say, I want to be an individualist. I do not want to be just a face in a crowd. No, I want to be an individualist. If I brought this up somewhere in a bar at a party, and all the people around them, if they're paying attention, will holler, me too. And they'd all say, we all do. We all want to be individuals. Life is wired up. Now this is not uniform by any means yet, as you should know, throughout the world, is why, looked at from a political view, which is just one way, but why you have uniformity, why you have in certain areas of life's body that which from our view, from this part of the life's body on this planet, is looked at as being very tyrannical, closed societies politically, to wherein, such as during the Mao era in China, that everybody, as far as we could tell, everybody dressed alike from Mao on down. Everybody wore the same suit. And of course that gets attacked, always has been attacked from different views, but nowadays gets attacked, I'm sure, I know it does, in science fiction. It was, George Orwell, Animal Farm, 1984, Big Brother. It's nothing new. And in the midst of that, not of those people particularly, but in the midst of that going on in life's body, you have other people, as witnessed by our time and our place in other parts of the world, but us, let's say right now, the Western world is opposed to what China was, what some of the other countries are now, some of the other states and tribes. People here say the importance is to be an individual, which on another level that's the way life is going, I point out, is a kind of plurality. The more you have a plurality, the more you have mixture, the greater is the growth. Anybody can't see that. You'll never even see that life's alive and growing, but you just look and see where life, just at the simple, the obvious level, is the healthiest on this planet. And it's where there seems to be the most freedom. You people on tape at another time, another place, that has nothing to do, it's not limited by any means really to politics, police, powers of the state, but freedom. That is of various, sundry, conflicting ideas. The more the better, up to a certain point, and after that is everything else. When you get past a certain point, it's something else. If it gets too far, well, dig up Mao and ask him about having revolutions inside of revolutions. Every now and then it happens, they have to go, wait a minute, I went too far. You don't hear many people, by the way, say, we need to be more and more conservative, and they get so conservative they go, we went too far. You know why? Because they don't end up with these riots in the streets and the Red Brigade and all, people just tearing up society because of having a revolution within the revolution. If it got to be non-revolutionist in the ordinary sense, the conservatives got more and more conservative, you won't have them out in the streets. You'd walk in and you'd wonder, where is everybody? And everybody's back to the main road. People, many people in life's body are wired up to say that one of the more important aspects of life, one of their more important drives, is to be an individualist. They say that, and if you can see them and you up to a certain point, they say that, and their words absolutely, their actions absolutely deny it. It is a fearful thing to truly be an internal individualist. And it is not something that ordinary people can decide to do. They say they do. I'm aware of that. And probably many of you, without any doubt, went through those kinds of periods maybe for a long time before you got involved with this. That was one of the ways you felt perhaps in earlier years, that you were being stifled. You're not sure how, but you wanted to strike out, maybe not physically at your parents, but leave me alone with all this crap. Or you started trying to ask questions about, why is this religion? Why is our religion better? Or why is the society I live in better? And you ask the people supposed to know, from your parents on up or down, and they all go, shut up, kid. Or where should they go? Stay here, I'll be right back. And you go, wait a minute. I'll tell you later, you're too young to understand. Try me. I got to go. I'd love to talk to you. Can't right now, physically impossible. The feeling would not be unexpected in many people that get involved with this, that there has been along the line that you thought to yourself that you really wanted to establish some kind of individuality, you wanted to fight for it, or you wanted to pay all kinds of price. You cannot ordinarily decide to do that. People say they do, I understand that, but look at their actions. Look at your actions in the past. First thing you'd want to do, if I got to go this far to point out how everything eventually becomes at least partially ironic in the 3D world, it has to. If you want to be an individual, the first thing you want to do, what? After you try and make some kind of stand, is to think, God, this is, you don't think it in these words, but boy, this is lonely, and you will find, where do other people like me, other individuals hang out? And you find there's a coffee shop. There's a place that some other people hang out, so you go there to be an individualist. If I have to point out any more of what might help you a little bit, to show that at the ordinary level, you and other people throughout history that wanted to be individualists, you never heard them say that they got satisfied that they succeeded. They may have flaunted whatever the prevailing morality of their day was. They may have lived an exciting life, apparently, in the 20s back in Paris, and had 3 mistresses, left their wife over here in the United States, painted, spit in the street, never went to church anymore, hardly ever bathed, looked weird, and said, I'm an individualist. But surely you hear what I'm saying. It's not either right or wrong or here or there in an ultimate sense. But people wired up to do that in life never feel as though they succeeded. And then go past a certain point and it becomes a process that seems to be out of control, which is then working efficiently in another direction, but that they've gone so far that it's just meaningless. They never get the feeling, they never get the payoff that they thought they wanted. It's just the way life is. To be a revolutionist requires, to be an individualist requires that you would be able to cut individually the general genetic flow through you. You would have to absolutely be able to break from the past, not theoretically, not in a way of thinking about it, plotting about it, not because of the way you dressed. That's the only way that you'd be an individualist, but it is not what people would imagine. It is fearful. If it was a gradual process available to ordinary people, let me speak about it in that sense for a minute, and ordinary people could, if I could talk to them or somebody could start giving them step-by-steps of 12 series course on how to be an individualist, and it gradually got them closer and closer. After 2 or 3 lessons, people showing up, people would get very uneasy. They'd get frightened, really, if I could do that or if somebody could. It is not what they would expect. They would simply be frightened. To be an individualist, now repeat one more time, I'm talking about the way you dress and where you hang out. I'm talking about now in the cortical areas and perhaps even the limbic areas, to have a kind of custom-made higher nervous system fit. To be a true individualist, it would be like a, in a real sense, more expanded sense, be like a silent, secret, solitary genetic trek. You'd be backpacking up an area that other people don't actually ever go. Now people down below, they can sit around, they can smile, they can talk about it and threaten to, and buy equipment, that is buy books, buy ideas. But to start doing that is not as easy as people think. To actually do that is not what people think. And as I said, if indeed you could take ordinary people and get them to gradually begin to sense what was involved, to be able to see it, they would not like it. They'd say, well, no, that's not exactly what I meant. They would be, I can just start putting a few adjectives on it, but they would become frightened. They would think of it as being, once they got a feel for it, a sense of it is, well, that's lonely. Their feeling is, that is not what I had in mind. They did not have a clear knowledge of it, and so they would be left with saying, I do not feel, that doesn't feel like what I wanted. You got it wrong, or what you're telling me, that's not the way. I want to find another way to be an individualist. And they do not. People do not want to be an individualist. People want to fit in other than the fringes I talked about. The way life stays healthy and sane is for people to fit in, not just your looks, not just your clothes. That's just all that's observed in the city. You are wired up, assuming you're not part of the real, unprofitable but necessary fuck-up fringe. Let's assume that all of you are by and large just naturally somewhere in the bell curve. You want to fit in. You do not want to be an individualist. It's not a judgment. It's not a matter of morality. It's not a matter of intelligence. It's a matter of genetics. People want to look alike. Once an area, a tribe, a state, a nation, a society, a civilization, all of that, once it has stabilized, what happens? Even if you've got diverse peoples, there were 4 or 5 tribes. Look back at the history of Europe, dragging in the Danes and the Swedes and the Germans and Anglos and the Saxons and some of the Slavs, and they all get together, and through it takes hundreds of years, let's say. And then a little state comes out of Bavaria, and it becomes Germany or whatever. The people, they end up, and they all begin to look alike. Genetically, they'll begin to breed, but beyond that, they'll begin that no matter what kind of dress codes, what kind of past eating habits, structures of their society, they all begin to fit in. You must know that. They have got to fit in. People do not analyze it, but if you are going to talk about an individual nervous system of having, just for the sake of conversation, an individual series of wants, drives, and goals, one of them would be to fit in, while simultaneously it being most common, just in the middle of the bell curve again, in the more complex areas of life's body now, of people saying otherwise. Not just the United States, but you know this. Almost everything other than what is considered now the less civilized countries is individuality. Is of importance to people. How else are we going to have art? How will we ever have new political ideas? How will we ever grow? What's the fun of life if we're all going to be regimented and all dress alike and think alike? Nah. I want to be an individualist. No, they don't. Life makes people say that. Life makes people think that they indeed are, that they're struggling to be, but they do not want to be. You got no choice. At the ordinary level, how are you going to be? Now forget all the physical aspects. If I just directly stated, people do not want to be an individualist intellectual, and you went, well, wait a minute. And I said, all right, how would you go about it? Now you could begin to imitate old weird Uncle Elmer and say, well, I'll find out what everybody's thinking, and then I won't think that. I'll think just the opposite. Well, there's no holding you back, is there? All right, you do see that would not make you an individualist, don't you? Because then you're still subject to, you find out, all right, what does everybody think about the abortion question? And you read a poll that says 65% of the United States think so-and-so, and you think, all right, I think otherwise. All right, what's going on with gun control? What's going on with increasing taxes? What's going on with coming up with a new form of prohibition having to do with tobacco or anything? And you find out what most people think. If you don't already know, but you can always consult a poll. They're in the papers almost every day. And you say, all right, I think just the opposite. You do see that you're not an individualist. Well, what else could you do? Where would you start? How would you ever begin to take the first step up some kind of mountain or towards some area to be an individualist? You can be a professional, full-time naysayer, that just whatever you find out that the majority thinks right now, I think otherwise. And I mean it, I think otherwise. So, well, I'm an individualist. Oh. I guess it should be obvious to some of you, if you need things to be obvious again in our little private way, that there is no way taking 3D information, the great world of dual-based ideas, feelings, truths, reality, there is no way to ever escape from that through ordinary means. Because I've given what, from some view, should be an extreme example to say, well, all right, people want to be individualists, don't they? And everybody goes, here, here, yes. Not just look different, that doesn't prove anything, right? But you want to, internally, where it counts, especially here, yeah, is to be your own person, your own man with a small m. You want to be an individualist, yes. All right, how do you start? There is nowhere to start. You can say, well, all right, the thing is, you're not carried along. You don't think what everybody else thinks just because the majority thinks it. All right, sounds good, I guess. I'll give you that much. So how do you go about it? Well, I'll find out, yes. Well, I'll find out what the common wisdom is, what everybody's thinking now. Okay, and then what will you do? Well, I guess I won't think that. I'll think the opposite. And then, of course, if you were, in some manner, if you were some fictitious, reasonably insane person back in the city, Even you, wouldn't you? You see what I'm fixing to do, my little act? You'd have to go, wait a minute. That's not really being an individual. It's just to find out what the majority is thinking right now and say, I think the opposite. And then, of course, you might think, boy, I'm getting sharp because I figured out myself. And so maybe you'd look at me and go, aha, now I know what you're talking about. Now I say, okay, we'll discount that. So what would you do? All right? You're stuck. There is no way out. Well, for one thing, it's not a trap. You're not supposed to get out. But there is nowhere to move. You're like in the land of oranges, and you're dreaming about apples, and you can pick up an orange and call it an apple, but still an orange. There's no way to get out of there. Well, don't worry. It's not so much a matter of saying you can't get out of there. You know, it's not really a matter that you're taking the simple, that you're taking the old, common, genetic run ideas and possibilities in you. It's not in some way in changing those. It's not a matter that you're going to make the simple in you more complex. It's not that you're going to be able to take the primitive sides of you and in some way civilize them. It's the ability to recognize at any given time on the smallest level there's the two possibilities presenting themselves to you individually and to life. But right now to you individually, that one of them is more complex. To start pursuing that one, to listen to that one, to do that one, it may change 5 minutes from now. Well, don't worry about 5 minutes, it may change. You may recognize that this is no longer, at least right at this occasion, that what I did in the past is not necessarily what I should do now. That what was more complex, that seemed to be almost an exact situation like this X months ago, and I did such and such, now apparently just the opposite would be the more complex. Put it to you, spin it a little bit. I periodically get asked by you people that some of you will relate to me a situation wherein either you were involved, or you might just say a situation to which you were privy, that seemed to be almost dangerous. That maybe somebody you know, something you were just kind of involved with, or right there on the outskirts, and people almost getting down to shooting one another. Or something really unexpected happened, that this one person you knew was talking to somebody else, and the other person pulled a gun, and it gets into something, and you say, you know, what could I have done? You know, I mean, it's so surprising, and the people, and they may have been relatives of yours, friends of yours, I don't know what, but what you're describing is, you've tried to tell me before, the situation was on the verge of being so violent that even though I could see through it, even though I had better thoughts than they did, more complex thoughts, I didn't know what to do, or I tried to say something and it didn't seem to work. What could I have done differently? How can you handle a situation like that? Do you follow me? For anybody who's ever asked that, I'll give you an answer. Fine. Well, I've given you some responses, but let me give you a general answer. You can write this down as a law. Doesn't sound like a three-dimensional law the way I'm about to put it. Well, I like it. Here's the law. See, the beginning is it's real difficult, which doesn't sound much of a law. Well, imagine if Newton had said, it's kind of difficult to make an object not moving, start moving. All right, never mind. Here was the law I was going to give you. It's real difficult to be of any help in a primitive situation. That's it, Charlie. I don't care whether it's strangers. I don't care whether it's your mother and father about to kill each other. If they're down to that primitive level, it can be your blood, kin, or it can be strangers, be close friends. But I'm going to tell you, it's very difficult to be of any help in a primitive situation. If you need a little more specific, how about back to one of my examples of some tapings back when I made up my island of squat land and all the primitive people there, you remember that ate the expert that showed up on them? those simple, primitive people. Let's go back there. It is not easy to be of assistance to the primitive. Now, of course, us saying that, not in some ordinary anthropological, sociological, any of those ways. It is not that we are superior or any example I make up. But you are more complex than someone else, or you would not be having, assuming there's some validity to it, having the idea that you should help or could help. So you're more complex than they are to start with. We're assuming that you see, well, what you people are doing, the way you're going about it is not profitable. You're saying you're trying to reach a certain end, or you say that you're trying to rectify a misunderstanding, or you're trying to bring about some peace where there is now conflict, but the way you're going about it is not the most efficient. It's not the most profitable. I would like to help. I got no real vested interest, but I would like to help. It is not easy to help primitives. It is not easy at all to help the simple. Would anybody expect that I'm now going to say, forget all these islands and your relatives? And what is it when people ordinarily, think about it, any example you can think of right quick, when people try to change, when people try to help themselves, what are they always working on? Primitive stuff. Well, I'll be technical. Chicken shit stuff. Well, I guess one of the biggest things holding me back from some major spiritual breakthrough is I still smoke. I believe that I'd be closer to the cosmic forces, except sometimes I still play with myself, or I'm still mad at my mother. That's it. All right, don't take that as an editorial comment on your problems. But look at it this way. What I just stated to you, it is very difficult to be of help in primitive situations. Do you see what I was making the little jokes about? The things I'm pointing out are primitive. They're simplistic, are they not? I mean, on the basis that in some way you would like to be able to reach somewhere where you start going around and maybe getting close to these spherical saddle areas, and you say, well, I'm sure the thing that's holding me back is I still harbor a grudge against my mother, or I still eat and use refined sugar. That's it. All right. Now let me take back my little apparent joke of this editorial comment. Let's assume that is it to you. Look how it seems to be. I got a lot of you laugh to think the thing that's holding me back from some spiritual breakthrough is I can't quit eating white sugar. Let's assume most of you kind of giggle. All right, whoever says that is a problem, if they can't quit doing it, it is a problem to them. Quit laughing. But now look, from the view of you laughing, and some of you are the ones that laugh, you're going, ha ha, how simple. It's very difficult to be of assistance to the simple. The simple do not want to change. All right, let me try it another way. Do you hear me right quick? You would have more success from a certain view, a certain three-dimensional view. You would have more success popping in to a private club or a banquet in London. Sophisticated, educated people in some way trying to help them. They're having a problem there. They can't get the vichyssoise heated up enough. Or they can't decide whether Socrates was really democratic in his political views or not. Anything. Or perhaps two of them, they're beginning to argue about who's going to win the soccer cup this year for Europe. And here it is, two guys with mutton chops or PhDs looking like they're about to fight. Listen right quick. You do hear me that you could pop in there and you've got more likelihood, just from an ordinary view, of being able to help those people, to assist them, than if I suddenly popped you down the middle of the great island of Scotland and these primitives, and they're having some argument about something, and you want to help them. You do hear me, don't you? Just from an ordinary view, you're much more likely, it's going to be easier to apparently affect some or to offer some assistance to these more complex people than it is to simple people. Imagine going there to more simple people, primitive people, and saying, listen, I'm not here to show off, nobody's going to know about it, I'm not here for self-aggrandizement, I don't want to be your leader, I just want to be, I know that you people are not as progressed as we are, you have not evolved, and you don't have the benefits of technology and all that, and I want to help you. You do understand you'd have your hands full, to say the least. Now back in here, it is not an easy matter to help the simple. It is difficult indeed to be of assistance in primitive situations. And what do you call this? Or what do you call the primitive side when you will pursue that possibility? When that is a possibility that you apparently speak through and look through. And then to think, if you need, again, any more proof or another way to look at it, of why apparent, or why ordinary change is apparently so, shall we say, difficult. Why even when you're apparently struggling with or pursuing it, it seems to lead nowhere rewarding. There is one more thing that some of you might find interesting, if not useful, about the primitives, the simple as opposed to more complex. You remember when I first brought out, or the second night I used, once I made up the island of Squat, about them eating the experts, the more complex that showed up, and then somebody asked a question, it was on the basis of how you could, from one view, look at the simple one, the simple consumed literally, and then perhaps otherwise the more complex. That is, the primitive natives there ate this more complex guy who showed up. We're like worms eating a dead person, a more complex being. And once I pointed out to you, I said, well, even though remember, right past everything is something else. Right past everything is its exaggeration, or right past everything is a reflection of it brought back down to a simple level and starting all over again. If you remember the one I drew going out and reaching a certain point, and then right behind that, it starts simple again. But I told you that one way you could look at this is that if you're trying to decide, all right, who's the more complex in these two possibilities, these two examples, these two groups of people, these two ideas. Let's make it nice and direct to begin with. And I was using the two groups of people, and I said one way to tell the more complex from the more simple is the ability that the more complex can come and go as opposed to the simple. That is this guy, people, groups of people. The more complex have the ability through boats, airplanes, that they can fly to the island of Squat and leave, whereas the more simple do not have that such an ability. Now, that's to catch you back up to where we were at one time. Let's stretch it out a bit. It is a literal fact, trust me, it is a correct reflection of a more enriched view of life. The primitives are much less able to come and go. The primitives are much less mobile. They do not have the ability that the complex do to move about, to explore. And it's not because they are stuck on the island of Squat. If any of you would like to consider a real simple, direct example, take our time and our place, contemporary life. Those that are judged back in the bell curve of the city to be very conservative, politically and otherwise. But that normally covers it just to say politically. Those people who are very conservative, nice big old guy with a beer gut, polyester suit, and don't write me from somewhere. Alabama, South Georgia, South New Jersey. The real conservative, the flag wavers, the conservatives of all time, can you hear me right quick what I'm going to say? They are very locally rooted. Such people, literally, can almost not travel Oh, now a guy from Mississippi that I'm talking about, this kind of genetic archetype. It's not social, it's genetic in the wide general stream of life. He and his ilk may be able to travel throughout the South, but they could almost not travel to Europe. He might do it once. Somebody might win a trip or something, but that's why all throughout the world that you've got Holiday Inns and Hyatt's somewhere, so that when he walks out and he realizes, Martha, come over here and look the way these people are acting. Look at the way they're dressed. These people ain't American. They ain't even human. These people are uncivilized. He can run back to Holiday Inn where there's some Americans there. It's almost impossible, the more conservative you are, which is another way of saying the more simplistic you are, those people are the living examples of such terms as parochial, chauvinistic. They are literally, physically, almost rooted to their locale. It's almost impossible. They got no interest in. They would explain it other ways. Well, yeah, I've seen some movies about New York and other places in Europe. I wouldn't want to go there. The people are heathens, they're infidels, they're nuts, they're killers, they're uncivilized, whatever. And of course I could take a view from somebody in New York thinking that way about, no, hey, what do you mean I want a trip, to Mississippi? What was that, the second prize? The first prize was you don't have to go? I ain't going to Mississippi, I ain't going down to Alabama. The more conservative is what conservative means, in a sense, once you begin to see it, is the more simplistic. And it's not a political, although that's the way they use it, it's not a political, it's not a social, it's not an any one thing identification. It is a part of life that is the more simplistic under certain conditions. And you can go by the bell curve to start with. If they're saying, well, this group of people over here, they are conservative, you're going to find the group's going to say, yes, we are. So that's not in doubt, and what they're doing is saying, vis-a-vis whoever's identifying them, and it may be even on a more expanded scale, but they are more simplistic than these people. But literally, what I wanted to get you to see, that I thought some of you would find interesting again, because all this is interesting once you begin to see it, is literally conservative people throughout the world, not just in Alabama, not just in the United States. Conservative people are almost immobile. They can almost not leave their community. I repeat one more time, they'd say, oh, I could. I don't want to. I've been out there. I've seen movies. My brother went to the war. He went there once. He told me about it. I wouldn't go there if you paid me. They are almost immobile. You can't even talk about them being an explorer. They're almost immobile. The simple have a very hard time getting about. Now, forget all that, inside of your own nervous system, inside your bloodstream, inside the chemical and electrical movements of your nervous system, the simple have very little ability. Simple ideas, simple feelings, simple moods, simple words in you have, I'm going to say in my understated way, extreme difficulty getting about. They are not inclined to travel. And if they do not travel well. They do not benefit. They do not learn from travel. They generally, if they're tricked into traveling once, like, yeah, I had a new idea once, scared me to death. I didn't know what they'd say. It'd be like them rushing back from the streets of downtown Rome or Budapest to run back to the Holiday Inn where some Americans are. Boy, I'll never go there again. The simple, the primitive inside the human system itself does not travel well. It is not mobile. It cannot wander about. It cannot explore other areas like a more complex person could to pop himself into Bucharest and think, God, how weird. He might not want to live there, but he could at least wander around. He could explore. He would never be satisfied, but he would not be frightened. He would have to be able to cut off. Like if we're going to jump back to my material example, which ordinary people can't do, but this conservative, this guy in the polyester suit with 8th grade education, walking example of prejudice and et cetera, it doesn't matter. This guy could not change, but if he could go and travel, he would have to cut in some way himself off from the past. Not that his father that his environment made him a bigoted, closed-minded, parochial, flag-waving nitwit. That's not what the past is. That's in the city what they believe. That's one of the great tricks of life, believing that, well, yeah, the past does make people like that. You know, if we got hold of Hitler at an earlier age, hell, we could have straightened him out. Al Capone? No, hey, if we'd have caught the little nipper at an earlier age, you know, and gave him some treatment. You understand, even nowadays, it's a beauty. Every now and then I kind of point this a little bit. I know how sticky it gets. But nowadays, the more complex people are, the less they could even tolerate that if somebody hinted, did you know that you can walk into the nursery if you knew how to look at day old babies? And by and large, you could point out those. They're going to end up being conservative, marching in parades and wearing white socks, go bowling. If you know how to look, you can just look at them. No, that ain't true. No. No. And that's the more complex. Does anybody see the interesting twist in that? That nowadays that is not true. That's insanity or worse. Whereas I could take a good old, the father or mother of one of these, I could say, well, now there's going to be another Huey Long. There's a little Hitler right there. I can look at him, I can tell you by looking. I could take his parents or some other old bricklayers or some other bigoted people and say, did you know I can do that? Or some people can. They might go, I wouldn't be surprised. And I said, if I said, not just me, but if somebody told them, said, did you know that you can look at people and almost tell how nuts they are or how dangerous they are just by looking at them? And nowadays, you could get just old bricklayers and ditch diggers would probably go, more so, believe me, relatively speaking, more so, go, yeah, I don't doubt it. I don't know what you mean. Then you could taking people with PhDs, psychiatry, sociology, philosophy, medicine, and tell them that, they would say, to whoever told them that, they would say, you are the living example of simplicity. That is so out of date. That's the kind of, there is no validity. We have statistically, we have shown blah, blah, blah. And they have not. But life has turned it to the point that is considered, they don't even have a word for it. It is just verboten to such a degree that it's insane, if not dangerous. So therefore, then they turn their attention apparently to areas that will not have the effect they think it does, such as, well, you're right, we must escape the past, but the past we're talking about is what your parents did to you. As always, life has a little, as far as I'm concerned, a little humor in there, because yes, what your parents did to you, they conceived you and had you. But that isn't what they mean now. What they mean is, no, it's what your parents did to you after you were born. Oh, okay. Well, back to, we're running out of the tape. The primitive in everyone's nervous system, the more simplistic, is very disinclined to move about. Consider that. It's a fact. Related to all sorts of things I've hit on head first and just bumped against tonight. But inside of you, the things that you may be convinced that you know, that you're just sure is true, or that you just never really analyzed, you never thought about, that this is the way I feel about something, this is the way I react, and it's got to be correct. The alternative, that is the opposite, can't be true. The simple are almost immobile. They're almost rooted to their spot externally. The conservatives, the simple people, are almost rooted there. Internally, the simple, the more primitive in the nervous system, in the brain itself, is almost rooted to that spot, which is the difficulty of telling somebody, well, think about something differently. All right, I will. That sounds like good exercise. It's almost like they can't get out of town. It's not psychological, there is a genetic, quite electrical, quite chemical, as always, a sensual reality to this. It's very difficult, to say the least, to be of any assistance in primitive situations. If you're trying to change your old mind, your old world intelligence, you're going to find it's very difficult to be of any help at all. And in ending, I might point out to you, not only can't it be very difficult, saying I will my tongue again in my pocket, it can become dangerous, such as more primitive people in a fight, and you see that you should not be fighting and pulling knives on each other. I heard the situation that you were debating. I can explain it from a viewpoint. It's not completely out of the question that you could get cut yourself while trying to help. Secondary, proffered assistance is not always necessarily that which the situation is calling for. It may not be the way in which life is about to give a temporary end to that particular scenario. The curtain may fall on it, and you may find out the curtain has got razor blades right at the bottom, and your toes may be under it. And then you might say, yes, I must agree that it does seem to be difficult to be of any real assistance in primitive situations. Au revoir.